We came out of the steamy gymnasium following the high school basketball game into a cold, crisp January night. The stars were out, the moon was high. It felt so good that we kind of looked at each other and said, why bother calling our parents? We'll just walk home. And so we did. For each of us, it was a different journey. For me, it would be 4 miles, but I'd done it many times. We hadn't gotten very far down Broad Street before we were encountered by a couple of Indians, as we called them in those days. Now, this was the time of the Great Turbulence, those days in the aftermath of the building of Kenzu and the relocation of an entire nation. Tensions were running high. Close encounters, particularly at night, were not advisable. And so we gave them wide berth. Despite that, they managed to jostle us. We passed through and kept walking. We hadn't gone very far before they started yelling after us. You, get back here. We want to talk to you. We kept walking. It got louder. We couldn't tell if they were getting closer or whether they were just raising their voices louder, but we weren't going to take a chance. We didn't look back. We just kept walking. Hey, you in the middle, meaning me. I've got something to say to you. We kept walking. It was getting pretty tense and scary. Their voices louder and louder. We kept trying to hear if there were footsteps. We weren't sure. At one point, Tom turned to me and said, "What do we do?" I said, "On the count of 3, we run." We couldn't have choreographed it any better. When I hit 3, we ran in 3 different directions, each to our own homes. I've never run so fast in my life. I think I crossed Main Street in one stride. I ran for fear. I ran in trembling. I ran for my life into the darkness. They ran from the tomb that early morning, the women that had come to finish the job of burying Jesus. They ran and told no one, for they were afraid, astonished, trembling. Despite how tragic the events of the last few days had been, at least they were real. There was real blood, a real body, a real burial. But this morning, everything was surreal. There was no burial, no body, an empty tomb. A young man greeted them with news that Jesus had been raised from the dead and that he was going before them to Galilee, just as he had promised. And they were to go and tell the disciples such. But they ran off into the morning in fear and in trembling and told no one. If you were hanging around last week, you heard again the story of the passion of Jesus according to Mark. And there's a really weird scene in that. when they have come to arrest Jesus and the disciples all run off. There's a story of a young man who gets caught, but manages to crawl out of his, well, essentially underwear and run off naked into the darkness. It's an odd scene, one that often gets overlooked, but it's very particular too. Why did Mark include it? One of the interesting pieces of that scene is that the young man's garment, the word in Greek for that, is a very particular word. It is a rare word in the New Testament. It shows up in Mark twice. Once as that which the young man wears, and once as that which is wrapped around Jesus' body when he is buried. A connection? I think so. We spend most of our lives running from something, sometimes ourselves, sometimes our fears, our anxieties, our worries. We run from relationships, we run from our jobs, we run from responsibility, we run in brokenness. Sometimes we just run not knowing why we're running, but we run in fear, in anxiety and trembling. And eventually, we manage to tumble into tombs of our own making, dead ends, exhausted, broken. It's there that Jesus meets us and wraps us with this fine linen cloth, reclothes us, makes us whole, raises us up to new life. In the church, we talk about that as baptism, a dying and a rising, and a new garment, perhaps of fine linen, a burial cloth, a new set of clothes. But whatever, we come to the tomb fully clothed now, to hear the news once again that Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. And so are we. We can stop the running. Oh, that it was that easy. But we're human. No matter how many times we are raised back up, we will run. And we will fall, and we will stumble, and we will fall face first in the muck and the mire of our daily existence. That's why Christ goes before us, waiting for us. And eventually we'll get there again. And he will pick us up and wash us off and give us a new set of clothes once again, that we might have life. It's why it's so important for us to continue to tell the story to one another, that we don't forget. In the midst of our running, we know to whom to run to and who will greet us. It's a call not to be like the women at the tomb. It's not a time to run away in fear and trembling for the craziness of this world, but a time to go and tell. to tell the good news that Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. But even more, that so shall we.